promised it you all for a while, and here we have it. This is going to be one video compiling all of release 3 from the Living Souls range. And today we will be starting off with batch 3 of their 40-year-old blended whiskey, bottled at 44.6%. It's a very similar blueprint to the previous releases. It's a parcel of whiskies where in 1998 they were kind of vatted together, with this one being finished in Islay quarter casks. Now it's a 40-year-old whiskey, so this Islay influence should be a little bit more potent given that they're quarter casks. And for those of you that aren't familiar, a quarter cask is a smaller barrel, as you would imagine, but it gives the liquid more surface area to touch, so it will impart flavour quicker. It will not age whiskey quicker. That's a conversation I've had to have with not a lot of people, but some. It's just there to give a bigger impact over a shorter amount of time. But here we have it. Beautiful, golden liquid. Certainly not as dark as the first release, which I think was finished in sherry, or maybe that was the second. I'm losing track now, but let's smell it. Big waves of like syrup-soaked tropical fruit. There's some baking stuff in there, not baking spices, but like the ingredients to bake a cake, so it's like cake batter, like golden castor sugar. There's even a bit of banana just kicking around the back of it. Some nice nutty notes, get this kind of candied pecan mapley profile. I'm getting that with a lot of whiskies at the minute. I think just because it's October and autumn, everything must taste like maple and pecan. There is the tiniest bit of smoke. It's not particularly impactful, but I do like how, apart from very premium 40-year-old single malts, I can't think of any other blender who's releasing liquid this old, and with every batch it's a slightly different finish. It does keep it quite exciting. The smoke is popping a little bit more now. It's a bit ashier, but it's still quite far down the glass. The upfrontness is all of this tropical fruit syrup. It's nutty. I wouldn't describe it as dry in any way. It seems to be very laden with these just big fruit and nut notes. The banana thing's becoming more apparent. Banana, like candied pineapple, or dried pineapple. Let's taste it. Let's see where the magic is at 40 years old. There's the smoke. You start to feel it pull through. I don't think that was quite 40 seconds worth of tasting, and obviously the video's edited down a little bit. But it really just pushes that big fruity syrupiness for ages. It's quite decadent, it's very welcoming. You could pour that for anybody and they'd really enjoy it. And then you start to feel things becoming a little bit ashier, a tiny bit smokier, and you're like, oh, there it is, it's kind of picking up, it's moving through. And then as you go to swallow the whiskey, Islay quarter cask. Ashy dryness. It has a slight feel of Lafroig style dryness to it. That's not confirmation, that's just me thinking. It's chewy, it's ashy, it's cigar smoke. Probably the richest offering in this 40-year-old range, and that is saying something. With that smoke still lingering around your senses when you actually go back to smell it for the second time. It does linger a little more, the nuttiness seems to pop out a little bit more, and the fruitiness is quashed a bit. It's getting a bit meatier now, a little bit chewier. Not really heavily smoked meat, but something that's just been like softly seared on a griddle. I always talk about barbecue pineapple and this is certainly a big contender for that. I do love the finish. The finish is just this warming, comfortable, slightly acrid smokiness, but I like that. I love Laphroaig and Lagavulin and Ardbeg, so I'm a fan of that anyway. When you already have all of the layers of what is a very wonderfully well put together 40-year-old whiskey. This retails for about 120 to 130 pounds a bottle for a 40-year-old blend at just under 45% ABV. Still excellent value. It's reminding me of Starburst now. Bit of blackcurrant sneaking through, bit of green apple. Much more caramel on that third sip. Not vanilla, but caramel. And then, yeah, that chewy cigar smoke. Woody finish. Coats the glass lovely as well. Look at that. Finally sorted out the focus on this camera. That gets a solid 8.5 from me. I think that's the most consistent scoring whiskey we've ever had. I think they've all 3 40-year-olds have been 8.5s. Just remarkable. The folks at Living Souls, I'm always impressed by them. You can't really go wrong with what they do. But yes, that is batch 3 of the Living Souls 40-year-old, finished in Islay quarter casks, and that gets a solid 8.5 out of 10. Next up, we have the 10-year-old Lagmore, and I'll explain to you all what Lagmore is in just a second. So, part 2. The 10-year-old Living Souls Lagmore release. Now this has got some interesting information on the label. It says Speyside blended malt Scotch whisky. So now this is more than 2 single malts from more than 1 distillery. It's 10 years old, first filled bourbon barrels, Lagmore, Lagmore, mostly single estate at 48% ABV, and this is batch 1, so that would indicate there's a batch 2 coming soon. With it saying mostly single estate, we can put this into the category of teaspoon single malt. Now this is commonly done with Balvenie and Glenfiddich too. Those releases, I believe, are typically released under the Wardhead release, Wardhead. That typically is Balvenie with some Glenfiddich added to it. And as they are 2 separate distilleries, it's still classed as a blended malt. It also happens with Glenmorangie. That is typically labelled as Westport blended malt or teaspooned malt, I think is a phrase you can still legally use under some specific circumstances. I actually don't know what the Glenmorangie is blended with. I can imagine Ardbeg or maybe some old Glenmorangie stock, because LVMH did used to own Glenmorangie. But most of this is sourced from the Ballandalloch distillery, which I think is just celebrating or has just celebrated its 10-year-old birthday. Classic Speyside style. It's up in the sort of Elgin area, and it gives you all those classic Speyside notes. But here we have this wonderfully golden style of whiskey, and I'm expecting a very classic Speyside style from this. So let's smell, let's taste. Instantly you are transported to an apple orchard. All of that fresh, green, crisp snap you get when you bite into a very ripe apple. There's some pear notes in there too, but I think we tend to put apple and pear together just because they have somewhat similar taste profiles. If I'm being really specific, if you've had those Japanese white pears, which are like super juicy, it's in that area. There's a white grape note, but not as in the fruit. There's a drink that's made called, I think it's called Scholle or Schloer, and it's a white grape, like fizzy drink. It's a soft drink, and it's quite refreshing. It's quite lovely, and it does have that to it. A slightly more savoury hint of white vermouth at the back of it, something like Nolly Prat or even Lillet Blanc. There's something really crisp. The Noilly is it tends to be a bit more herbaceous, whereas the Lillet Blanc is like super clean, really crisp. But it does have a little bit of herbaceousness to it. Much like the 40-year-old though, it's very welcoming, it's very soft, it's very approachable. But let's see what this can do at 48% at 10 years old. This is very much whiskey with a lot of depth to it, even at only 10 years old. All of those big ripe green fruit notes, the white grape notes, the things that are really crisp and alive and bright, they do live on the nose. The palate is a very different thing in general. It's very forward, it's quite spicy in a nice way. I almost describe it as like white pepper. Even the tiniest bit of chili flake. It's not uncontrollable. If you can drink whiskey, you can certainly handle this. It's not spicy as in it's gonna blow your head off. It's just a nice contrast to what you smell. There's also a nice bit of saltiness to it, which I really wasn't expecting. And it leads into this herbaceousness, that more intense style of white vermouth I was talking about, typically French style vermouth. And you've got these kind of green leaves, you've got these green peppercorns, just like herbaceous, sagey, rosemary kind of things. Really well put together. The finish too I would describe as quite chalky. It's got this minerally sort of quality to it. It's almost like what I imagine unpeated Laphroaig would taste like. It clings to all the sides of your mouth. It leaves you with this kind of coating in a nice way. Nose is still the same, all those big fruits. Doesn't seem as intense then. It seems a little bit more laid back now. A few more sweet notes of brown sugar. There's even like a really nice sort of dark chocolate, almost dark chocolate chip feel to it. And again, in a similar way to the 40-year-old, there's a nice banana note on this. Almost like caramelized banana, or like a banana split. It's got like fudge sauce or toffee sauce on it or something. It's a really nice bottle of whiskey. So this comes in at like £53 a bottle, maybe 55, depending on where you're buying from. Ballandalloch do now release their own single malts. They're all relatively young, and they all tend to be in the sort of 90 to £100 bracket, sometimes a little bit higher. They are all cask strength. I think a couple of them are single barrels or very small batch releases, typically in virgin oak and some of the very interesting barrels, very good quality looking barrels in terms of colour. But I would say for 53 quid, if you've never tried Ballandalloch, I don't know what this is teaspooned with, but it seems like a really, really good quality example of a newer Speyside single malt distillery that isn't focusing too much on the idea of sherry, port, sherry. It's clean, it's crisp, it's really bright, it's got a nice herbaceous, salty, dark chocolate finish to it. Really well balanced, really well put together. I'd give that like a solid 8 out of 10. For the money, you could argue that's probably one of the best ways to try a new Speyside distillery in the world of whiskey, not just necessarily Scotch. But thank you for joining us for that one. Coming up next, we're moving into the world of sherry with Glenrothes 17-year-old. Part 3. Glenrothes 17-year-old, all drawn from first fill Oloroso sherry hogsheads. 51.5%, again, a batch 1, so we can assume there'll be a batch 2. There's not much for me to really tell you about Glenrothes. It's gone through a huge amount of... It's owned by someone else but distributed by a different person, and then it's then owned by a different company and distributed by them and moved. It is now currently owned by the Edrington Company, so that is Macallan, Highland Park and Glenrothes and nothing else. They famously sold Famous Grouse a couple of months ago to William Grants. I've got my own opinions on that. If you want to know more about that, I will be releasing an article on it soon, but just message me on my social media platform and I'll make sure you get a copy of it, because some interesting personal thoughts in there. But here we have what I would say is a classic example of Glenrothes, fully matured in Oloroso sherry for 17 years at 51.5%. Those are the kind of numbers that I think Glenrothes fans deserve. Their 18-year-old was recently repackaged, 18 months, 2 years ago, and the price shot up by about £30 just for a slightly fancy box. And it was always a nice whiskey, but it was never like £160 bottle of whiskey. And then they have a 15-year-old, which is about £100, I think. I haven't tried that, but I remember back in the day when they had like a distiller's cut one or a director's cut release that was a boozier sort of 10-year-old. That was really good. The 12-year-old was a really good whiskey for about £38. Glenrothes has been another victim of premiumisation, and it doesn't particularly seem to be working. But we're not talking about that one. We're talking about this Living Souls release. So let's smell it, let's taste it. I famously, and I've said this so many times, you're probably bored of hearing it, it's not that I don't enjoy sherry, it's just I fall in and out of love with it more than any other type of whiskey barrel. I'm not a huge fan of port barrel stuff, I'm not a huge fan of rum cask stuff. It either really works or it doesn't work at all. But with sherry, it's so available and so there, and so in demand, that sometimes I either get a little bit bored of it, or you've had one, you've kind of tried all of them. You know, it's difficult to remember the last sherry cask that really impressed you. But at the same time, something just being good is fine. You don't necessarily have to be blown away by every single whiskey you try. It just has to be nice. Price dependent, obviously. But the smell on that is everything that you would look for in a classic sherry cask single malt Scotch whiskey that is unpeated. It is this abundance of soaked raisins and apricot and dark chocolate. It's a really nice, almost like Black Forest Gatto note to it. So again, those chocolatiness, that creaminess, those kirsch soaked cherries. Again, a little bit of saltiness coming in from this. Never would often describe Glenrothes as a salty whiskey, but depending on which bodega the sherry casks came from, Oloroso can have a little bit of saltiness to it sometimes. This beautiful, almost like caramel milk chocolate note. As a little bit of a side note, my favourite sherry casks, the one that always tend to blow me away, are the ones that out of nowhere get this caramel note in them. Even though sherry is a fortified spirit, it has added sugar to it, they don't tend typically to lean caramelly. You could definitely argue they do, but I would say they don't. Pedro Jimenez in particular is always so over the top with sweetness, it almost becomes savoury to a degree. But this just has that really nice caramel note. The last bottle of whiskey that really did that for me, it's down there so I won't grab it. I talked about it in the collection video, was a Ben Romack single barrel, cask number 333. That was a Oloroso hogshead again, I believe, but it was American oak. And it was so caramel driven, it was just incredible. But yeah, dark chocolate, raisin, apricot, caramel, a little bit of saltiness. Even those kind of milk chocolate bars that have little kind of crystallized caramel notes in them. It's got that to it as well. And it's also a little bit peanutty. You can almost think about this as a boozy Snickers bar. But let's taste it. The palate gives you more of that drier side of sherry. That's interesting. We'll talk about the finish in a minute. That is quite interesting. But it leads with that saltiness, that nuttiness, that dryness. And when you smell Oloroso sherry, for me, it's all about this kind of dark brown sugar and nuts, whatever kind of nut you can imagine. Almonds, peanuts, walnuts, hazelnuts, it all kind of fits into that plethora of Oloroso sherry. It can go in so many different directions. Like Oloroso sherry is really common, but it's used because it can give such a vast and interesting flavour profile, certainly dependent on what distillery uses it. But yeah, you move from that kind of unctuous, hedonistic nose, it's very indulgent, into this drier, saltier, more like, whoa, what's going on there? More complexity, much more interesting. And then that caramel note comes back at the end, and it really reminds me of dime bars. If you've never had a dime bar, I apologise, because it's one of the most interesting chocolate bars in the world. It's like an almond caramel. It's quite solid, and then it's surrounded with like a flaky layer of milk chocolate, and they're delicious. I think they're Danish, but they're one of my favourite chocolate bars, and the finish on this reminds me so much of a dime bar. I'm kind of regretting saying at the start that I don't like sherry, but I've not had an impressive one for a while, but this actually is pretty good. And even to smell it now, it's just all of that almondy caramel milk chocolate. It's a really, really good selection of sherry casks. This is more expensive than the Lagmore. It comes in at it's almost pretty much double the price plus a bit more. I've seen it at a few different retailers for anywhere between 115 to 120, so it's only a little bit cheaper than the 40-year-old. But the 40-year-old could put some people off because it's an Islay finish or an Islay cask finish, whereas this is just all sherry. See if I can get like a little shot of the glass, but it is particularly oily as well. It is coating the glass in a very, very interesting way. But that is delicious. That's quite a good round story with the little phrase I had at the start of this. But yeah, that is a Snickers bar and a dime bar all in one, with a little bit of added saltiness at the back of it. It's significantly cheaper than official Glenrothes bottles. It's stronger in alcohol. And for a 17-year-old batched single malt at £115, not cash strength, but I do think it is very tasty. Again, I guess a solid like 8.5 from me. That is one of the most interesting sherry cask whiskies I've had this year that isn't peated. Because so far this year, all of the big hitters have been loads of sherry and loads of smoke. But as far as sherry goes, that is what you are looking for. I'm going to tell you that very honestly. But we move on now from sherry into the smoky stuff. And I've been quite indecisive about how to order these. In fact, I think I'm going to flip them again. So next, we're going to be doing a 7-year-old Torabhaig, which is probably my favourite, along with Ardnamurchan, probably my favourite new peated island distillery. Ardnamurchan isn't on an island, it's on the mainland. But everything I've had from Torabhaig's been really good. So I'm quite intrigued by this, haven't tried it yet. But that's coming up next, so if you're into your peaty stuff, keep watching. For you peat fans, thank you very much for sticking around. We are now moving into the world of West Coast whiskies. So the writing on these is really small, so I apologise if you can't see it. But this is a 7-year-old Torabhaig, batch 1, 51.5%, which I'll be honest seems to be a bit of a golden strength for the folks at Living Souls, which is nice to see, to be fair, because at £60 a bottle, this is about the same price as a regular bottle of Torabhaig, if not slightly older, and I use the word slightly very begrudgingly, because Torabhaig don't declare age statements, but I can guarantee the majority of their stock is between like 5 to 8 years old at this point. Very excited to see when they release 10-year-old stock, 12-year-old stock, but it's always been really tasty. Torabhaig is one of those distilleries that appeared during the kind of, would you call it like a pseudo golden era in the early part of COVID for whiskey, where prices were going crazy and people were buying everything, but the liquid was always really good quality. They fitted into the same bracket as Ardnamurchan, Nicknean, Rassay, distilleries which have stood the test of time and are all now approaching their 10-year anniversary, if not have already gone past that. Glasgow distillery as well. There's too many to even kind of put into that, but this is one of the good ones. So it comes in, as I said, about £60 a bottle, which for a 51% peated whiskey from the Isle of Skye, I think is quite good, given the competition that Talisker hasn't really tried to compete with. We've got a very light colour. This is all first fill bourbon barrels, and a very lovely coating on the glass as well. Extremely oily, and I know what I'm expecting from the nose. Instantly transported to a beach on the west coast of Scotland just after a rainstorm. Salt and oyster shells. It's a really gentle kind of smoke. It's almost, it's not about the bonfire for Torabhaig. I don't think it ever has been. When you think about really famous styles of Islay whiskey, it's always about this really intense style of smoke. Even with lower peated styles like Kalila, Talisker obviously is quite salty. But with Torabhaig, it always seems much more focused. An incredible, like, salted caramel note running through there. Salted caramel gets talked about a lot within whiskey, but this genuinely does smell like liquid salted caramel that someone is preparing near the world's tiniest little fire. There are some nice fruity notes in the back of this. They're almost kind of softly tart and quite sour. There's things like gooseberries and green gage. A little bit of green apple, which again works really well with the salted caramel note. There is also too, I think when we mention the word industrial within whiskey, it can conjure up bad things, especially even if you're a fan of things like Laphroaig and Ardbeg. You talk about the word industrial and people think about Swarfiga and WD-40 and all that kind of thing. But I think about one of my nan's partner's old cars, and it was a Volvo S40 estate car. Or was it a V40? Might have been a V40. And he was a carpenter and a tradesman. And the back of his car always smelled like freshly sawn wood and like Swarfiga and WD-40 and all these other things. But it's not a bad note for me. It's always quite nostalgic. And I'm hitting the nostalgia quite hard just with the aroma on this. But yeah, salted caramel, salt, some tart green fruits, and then an industrial quality, which is very comfortable. I can appreciate that's not for everyone, but it certainly is for me. But let's taste it and we'll see where we're at. That is an excellent example of peated whiskey, where the peat is present, it's dominant, but there are loads of other things driving the flavour profile at the same time. I doubt they'll ever watch this, but one thing I do have to applaud both Torabhaig and Living Souls for. Torabhaig for just making fantastic peated whiskey, like literally some of the best I've tried, especially when it comes to value. They beat a lot of the sort of halo brands in a big way. Doesn't come in a fancy box, doesn't have a mega age statement, sometimes it has no age statement, but the whiskey's always better. It just is. And Living Souls for bottling, such an incredible example of a batch. Now, when you put peated whiskey together as a batch, as a vata, can't use the word blender because that means legally something different. But when you're putting a batch of this stuff together, it must be really difficult to not go, how smoky can we make it? Because you could make this pretty intense and very over the top. Instead, you have this wonderful delicacy of flavour, and it leads with these salty notes. Not salted caramel now, it's just salt. It's classic West Coast salinity. Underneath that are some beautiful herb notes. It's sweet basil and mint, and those are my two favourite herbs in the world. Love making anything with them. You get this wonderful dryness to it, and that's before you even get to the finish. The dryness is very much coming from great quality first fill bourbon. And then as you swallow the whiskey and you delve into the finish, all of those qualities are still there, and you are met with this familiarity of West Coast peated Scotch single malt. And if you like it, you love it. Doesn't particularly matter which distillery it's from. You'll have a favourite, but if you like that style, if you see the word peat, you're going to love any of this. I do reach out to you all now and say, if you haven't tried a bottle of Torabhaig yet, You really do need to, because this is quite fabulous stuff. The second sip seems so much sweeter. You get hit by this wall of caramel. You'd almost think it's unpeated on the first sip. And then underneath it, the smoke starts to brood. It comes up and it flames it. And you get this lovely kind of, it's almost like an S wave. As things dip down, you get sweetness. As things peak up, you get smoke. It's salty, it's sweet. It's quite Moorish. I do have to admit, there aren't many whiskies that are called Moorish. Ardnamurchan and Midgey first release, I think, is the only word I've really used to describe that whiskey. But this fits into that Moorish category. This is an absolute delight, and I think for £60 a bottle, it's hard to not give this a solid 9. It is a sweet, salty, caramel, basil, mint. Excellent example of what happens when you've got the right people sourcing the right whiskies and creating an exceptional style of small batch whiskey. So this gets a solid 9 from me. This is the Torabhaig 7-year-old first fill bourbon batch 1 from Living Souls. Solid 9 out of 10. The highest rated so far in this Q3 release. But join me tomorrow, but it's not tomorrow, it's in the next video, for a Williamson 13-year-old, or as some of you may know it, a 13-year-old Laphroaig, bottled at 46%. But yeah, stay tuned for that one. The final part, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Living Souls 13-year-old Williamson. Now this is actually a blended malt again, a 13-year-old refill bourbon cask Williamson. So we know that Williamson means Laphroaig after Bessie Williamson. What this single malt has been, well, what this blended malt has been teaspooned with, unaware of in the grand scheme of things. Really nice natural colour, just a classic kind of gold looking single malt, but with some of the product coming from the Laphroaig distillery. And there are hints at that straight away. This has been in the glass for about 15-20 minutes while I recharged this camera. And there is that instant contradiction of Laphroaig. There are those damp, dark, ashy, smoky, in this case very gently medicinal profiles. But there's also quite a grassiness to it. It comes across as quite light. Refill bourbon casks, they're giving us a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of autumnal sort of seasonal spices. It reminds me a little bit of rye, actually. We're getting some caraway, a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of kind of toasty sort of cinnamon spice. And then you have this Laphroaig element, which is, it's there. You can certainly smell it if you know what Laphroaig, in terms of its DNA, if you know what Laphroaig is like, you can certainly point that out. But it feels like it's been diluted by whatever this other whiskey is. It does say Islay blended malt, so we can maybe assume maybe some Kalila, maybe some Bunnahabhain. I doubt it'd be anything like a Bowmore, but we know that Living Souls have released Ardbeg in the past. In fact, the bottle is buried in that shelf somewhere. But this doesn't particularly have any Ardbeg-like qualities to me. There's none of that sort of fennel oiliness that you get with Ardbeg. It's Laphroaig, but from a distance, which is quite interesting. But let's taste it and see where we're at. This has, again, a lot of very classic elements of Laphroaig. There's this kind of smoked lemon balm, oven roasted lemon with like roast chicken, burnt herbs, Provençal herbs. It's got a very sort of southern Mediterranean burnt citrus, burnt herbaceous quality to it. But then there's some really nice sweetness running through it as well. You get this nice line of kind of caramelized sugar. Not brown or white, just sugar in general. Refill bourbon casks, giving you that little hint of vanilla, that little hint of caramel. There is a slight mintiness to the finish, which is quite a nice contrast to all of these sort of Herve de Provençal notes to it. The smokiness, it's certainly there, but I wouldn't describe it as dominant. If you have tried Laphroaig in the past and you really didn't like it, or if you tried Laphroaig and you loved it, like me, took me a while, but I got there. This almost seems like, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but Laphroaig light. It's taken all of those very intense qualities of that Kildalton style single malt and taken them down a little bit. Bear in mind, this is bottled at 46%. Most of Laphroaig's standard releases are 48%. There's only two that are 40, to my knowledge. That's the Select Oak and the regular 10. Everything else should be 48 or above sometimes. This has all of that, but you get that ashiness, that intensity from Laphroaig, but it only just seems to dip its toe into that TCP iodine quality. That seems very far removed from this. It's a light, still quite complex, but light style of Islay whiskey, which I suppose is a bit of a contradiction in terms when you think about Islay whiskey. But it's nowhere near as powerful as some of the Laphroaigs I've got behind me, just over there, or even something like the Laphroaig 10 sherry cask. It's almost like a beautiful end of the night product. You've had these wonderfully savoury mains and these nice sweet indulgent desserts, and then this just finishes it off with this herbiness, this smokiness. But it's just enough. It feels like it's on the limit of being too much. I do wonder what that's been teaspooned with. Very intriguing. But there it is. That's the 13-year-old Williamson Islay blended malt Scotch whisky. I'm going to give that a solid 8 out of 10. It retails for about £75 a bottle, which in the grand scheme of things for a 13-year-old, mostly Laphroaig whisky is not bad. 46% is a little bit below the standard Laphroaig ABV for that sort of price area, but I still think a solid 8 out of 10 is very good for that. But overall, and thank you for sticking with me throughout all of this review, this Torabhaig, which is the youngest of all of them, is by far the most impressive, but I think that speaks for Torabhaig more than it does anything else. But it also does speak to Living Souls for being fantastic independent bottlers and independent vatters and blenders of different kinds of whiskey as well. But that is my winner. I'll give this a solid 9 out of 10. But if you tried any of these, do let me know. The Torabhaig and the Glenrothes, by far my favourites. That Glenrothes with that caramel sherry finish with loads of dark chocolate and milk chocolate is just really, really, really good quality. But I've got to say, the Torabhaig is the winner for me, without a shadow of a doubt. I look forward to seeing whatever Living Souls release next, because they do have one more release to come out. Very, very excited by that. I've heard a couple of rumours and things. But thank you all for watching. We'll see you all next week with probably a more sort of standard video format. We're going to have just probably 2 reviews coming out on the same day. I'm not sure what to do yet. We have a lot of new stock, but one thing in particular, if you haven't seen the other part of the tour video, we've managed to finally get that up. I have just purchased a bottle of the new Scapa 10-year-old. It's the first bottle of Scapa I've ever owned, so I'm very much looking forward to reviewing that for you all. And then, I don't know with the rest, we've got some other quite fun stuff. So if you watch the other video of the Whisky Tour, it's called Whisky Collection Tour Part 2. Just let me know what you think. And if you comment on this video, I'll make sure to whatever gets the most sort of votes and contributions, I'll make sure to include that one in next week's releases. But thank you very much for watching. This has been a very long video to film. I'm not looking forward to editing it, but I will see you all next week. Cheers.